In the year 2050, there'll be 9 billion people. How do we feed them safely, fairly, and well? And make sure every mouth is fed.
Where I come from is everybody's a farmer. We have not known anything else. Yeah, in the marginal areas of the coastal, there are more pastoral communities. People are also embracing crop farming. So this is who we are. This is our lifestyle.
Meet Moses Shaha, leader of Kenya's small-scale farmers, hoeing maize on his family farm by the coast. Now, like farmers across the world, he's being urged plant crops not just for food, but for fuel. He fears the idea is crazy, but is he right?
Why feed a car in Europe while I'm going hungry? And you're telling me to substitute my land where I will grow my small crops, however small, yeah, with biofuel crops. To me, it does not make sense. We must choose between the two, food or fuel. Simply because Africa for a long time has had a problem in feeding itself.
While Africa's short of food, the world is running short of fuel. Until now, the fuels that power prosperity have been mostly coal, oil and gas. But these fossil fuels can pollute and are running short. Whereas new technology means cars, even power grids, can run on fuels from crops, like ethanol from corn or sugarcane. So farmers have a choice, plant food or fuel. Trouble is, farmers are rarely consulted.
The global biofuels debate is discussed at the international level in some other countries, and then it is thrown down our throats to digest. They don't even bother to ask us on the ground our opinion on the use of biofuels. It is not discussed at the level where it is to be produced. These are the farmers.
The black seeds of the jatropha tree, rich in fuel that can be burnt like oil. Jatropha's the biofuel that everyone's talking about in Kenya. In theory, jatropha could mean growing biofuels without jeopardizing food security. That's because it grows in marginal lands, where food crops don't flourish so well.
There are particular species of crops which grow in very marginal lands, sometimes even saline lands that have high levels of salt. Jatropha is a good example. And in fact, jatropha grows more where the land is marginal.
So Moses could grow not corn, but jatropha. An oil well in his garden? He's not yet convinced.
We do have spots of places where jatropha has been grown in homesteads. And we have been trying to see if those seeds can produce enough oil for someone to be bold enough to say, this is going to change my lifestyle. And what we fear is to replace food crops for jatropha crop. Agrofuels has been touted as the wonder crop, the liquid gold that they say it is. We're yet to discover that.
The world's increasing demand for biofuels over the next 20 years could need an area 1.5 times the size of Kenya. So Future Food took Moses on a trip to help solve his and our dilemma. Food or fuel. He'll be in for some surprises. Moses' first stop from Kilifi, his hometown, is just 3 hours away in the Tana Delta and the village of Dida Ade. Moses is about to discover how controversial biofuels can be, at least for local farmers. Abdullah Bile is a pastoralist on a community ranch. He fears for his future if community lands are turned over to biofuels.
What scares us most is the Jatropha project, because they believe that our land is idle. We depend on livestock for our livelihood, yet they want to start the project on our grazing land. We can see the signs that they want to start planting jatropha.
Do you know why they are planting it?
We do not know. We feel that it will be of no benefit to us. If we have to leave, then there will be war.
Most land here is community-owned, and Abdullah Bilay fears local leaders may hand land over to biofuels companies, foreign or Kenyan, without his agreement. Moses is worried.
Listening to Bilay, I could see him express his passion out, that the way things are at the moment does not augur well for them.
To find out more, Moses is off to see the local representatives of a Canadian biofuels company, Bedford Biofuels, who are planning jatropha plantations in the Tana Delta.
From here, I am going to visit Bedford jatropha plantation. I want to relate what Bilay has been informing us, the fears that they have.
Bedford plan to plant biofuels on up to 360,000 hectares. They say they hope to secure, always legally. They say they're committed to improving the standard of living of local communities, including education, healthcare, nutrition, housing, and clean water. Moses is shown around.
We started here a few months ago, and when we started, as you can see the surrounding, it's nothing but a bush.
Bedford say they'll have food crops, cattle and timber on their land, as well as jatropha.
When Bedford came, they were looking for where they can put up this project. And jatropha requires a lot of land.
Why did you think of putting the jatropha pilot phase here?
They say jatropha grows best in semi-arid areas. And when they heard that jatropha can do well in these ranches, it does need a lot of water, it does need a lot of rain. Then they said, why don't we also try?
How long do you suggest it'll take to give the first seeds, pods or whatever?
I want to show you, this plant here is 8 months old. Just as short period as it is, you can see it has already given some fruits. You see, this is the jatropha you're talking about.
Okay.
Yeah? And every seed, if you open it up, they either carry 2 or 3 of these seeds. These are the jatropha seeds, ready for crushing. From day one, I have been with this project, and I am the one who took the investors to the local people, who are the owners of these ranches, to sit and negotiate. We have a signed agreement, a legally signed agreement, which spells out what jatropha will do and what the role of the farmers will be as far as working together as partners is concerned.
And are these fears imagined or assumed, or are they real? Are they real to feel the way they're feeling right now?
I don't know who is assuming they will lose their land, because this land belongs to the local communities.
Yeah.
Some of these ranches were started way back in 1975. And for the last 30 years or so, they have not been getting any income because of that persistent drought. And when Bedford came and subleased the ranches, now the owners are getting annual income, which they have not been getting before.
Do you see any future conflict?
No conflict. And we don't see any conflict coming in.
About 5% of Africa has been sold or leased to outside investors in the last decade, much potentially for biofuels. But experts sympathetic to biofuels say there's enough land for food and fuel.
There is certainly plenty of land available for both food and energy production. There is no doubt about that. It's how we go about this that's the important thing. And to some extent it has been demonised, or in general has a bad smell about it. I think that is a false view. We've been using crops for energy since time immemorial, and 80% of energy in Africa comes from crops, one way or another, from the growing of biomass. We simply need to update that to make that efficient, and there is an enormous opportunity presented in that.
Moses says he'll wait to see how the opportunity in the Tana Delta project turns out.
We need to know more. We need to interview more farmers. So we need more time to walk into this project in Tana Delta and see the outcome of it.
To find small-scale farmers who've been growing biofuels a while, Moses heads back south. On the way, he's researching biofuels elsewhere in the world. He particularly wants to talk to a well-known critic of biofuels who's concerned the USA has been turning 40% of its corn into the biofuel ethanol, with potentially serious impacts.
David Pimentel, is it?
David Pimentel.
He's a bit...
Professor David Pimentel has studied both corn in the USA and jatropha in Africa.
How do you think it affects us here in Africa if a lot of corn is turned into ethanol?
Converting corn into ethanol is taking large quantities of food. Corn is food, and so we are converting corn food into ethanol, and this is contributing to food starvation, some in the U.S., but more internationally.
In your opinion, what should biofuels be the answer to solve Africa's energy problems?
No, biofuels should not be used, and I want to emphasize that, should not be used to try to solve their energy problems.
Well, what I learned from our conversation with Professor Pimentel is that he was not encouraging us in Africa to go the way America has gone. They need their energy for their own uses in their own land. But for us, we need the land to produce enough food to feed ourselves.
About a fifth of Kenya's land is farmed for food crops, almost all by small-scale farmers like Moses. So could they grow biofuels alongside their food crops? To find out, Moses is heading back from the Tana Delta south to the Shimba Hills.
Hodi, hodi. Karibu, karibu.
Peter Ndungu has been growing biofuels for 6 years. He's found jatropha hedges keep elephants out. But he also sells the seeds for fuel, intercropping jatropha with food crops. Warnings jatropha would compete for water, he says, unjustified.
This is where I plant maize and jatropha mixed with passion fruits.
Does the jatropha negatively affect your food crops?
I have been intercropping it with maize since 2006, and I've not seen any harm in it. Look at how healthy these passion fruits are.
Would you advise other farmers to follow your example?
I would advise them to plant jatropha and get some income, and also from the passion and the maize. They can reap the benefits of 3 crops at a go from one farm.
Moses is still skeptical.
Looks a good thing. It looks a good thing. But still, remember I said there were very few trees. 2, the production was very minimal. It was not convincing. Had I seen some twigs bending under the weight of fruit or pods, then I would have thought otherwise.
But, as we pointed out, Peter's still growing food crops too.
His food security may not be at risk, but still, what is his proceeds out of the jatropha plants? Are the jatropha plants enough to give him a livelihood? No.
So is Moses too skeptical about biofuels? He's come to Energy Africa to meet the people who introduced Jatropha to Peter and 100 other local farmers.
Ulrich, how are you?
They're a Kenyan company who farms sustainable oil crops and food for the tourist trade.
So what goes on here?
Moses hears they started cultivating Jatropha 7 years ago with high hopes, using their own oilseed crushers.
We believe here was a golden opportunity. Poverty reduction, clean fuel. We believed agriculture, keep people in the countryside instead of having them go into the cities and slums. Suddenly we have the crop that promised to combine all those things. And that made us excited.
The next stage is to see the farm. Yeah.
But other farmers didn't stick with Jatropha as long as model farmer Peter did. And Moses is about to learn the consequences.
What are some of the significant challenges that you may have come across?
One thing is growing Jatropha. Another thing is getting a high yield. It's a new crop and it hasn't been domesticated properly. So how to get a high yield, how to prune it correctly, how to be guaranteed a production which makes it viable, that is still a challenge.
Would you wholeheartedly advise small-scale farmers in their small holdings to give it all in Jatropha growing?
I would ask them to focus first on their food crops, but I'll be very cautious at this stage of the plant, which is early stage, without the plant being properly domesticated, to recommend it to small-scale farmers.
With such uncertain evidence, Moses is wondering about other countries in Africa. Southern Africa produces about 2% of the world's biofuels. Moses wants to know if a leading advocate of biofuels in Zambia can offer encouragement.
In my journey, I really needed to know, beside my home country, what is it about Jatropha and other fuel crops. So I decided to Skype Professor Sinkala in Zambia.
Hello.
Hello, Professor.
Good. I can hear you now.
Professor Sinkala tells Moses that given a choice between food and fuel, small-scale farmers will always make sure they're growing enough food for their families. So biofuels can safely be a source of cash without endangering food security.
For a farmer, the first target is food. They'll sell their produce in the food market. It's only what they can't sell that they'll target, they will now throw into the biofuels market. Therefore, I don't see disruption to the food production.
The professor says if Zambia used a quarter of its land for biofuels, it could earn almost 5 times its current GDP.
We could more than transform the continent. Kenya would be rehabilitated. I've been to Kenya.
The professor not quite winning Moses over.
Still, he did not convince me that what about food security? What about our land? Because if it is the answer to Africa's energy problems, it means we have to abandon food crops and put all our land under fuel crops. And if it is so, where are we getting the food?
That's not true.
As our Kenyan director pointed out, nobody's suggesting all land should be devoted to biofuels. Couldn't we strike a balance?
There could be a balance, you know. You could put some, because don't forget, people do need energy.
Yes, of course, that is the way people look at it. Scientists look at it. Entrepreneurs look at it. That is the way they're convincing us. But, as I told you, one example is the intercropping of one farmer in Kenya, where I visited, Mr. Peter. There wasn't enough to convince me that he's getting enough to feed his family. In the same context, even in Africa, it is the same story. Even if we intercrop, how much land will we need to get enough oil? It means vast, vast hectares and acres.
Vast acres, Moses fears, like those now being devoted to biofuels worldwide, as the USA, the EU and others try and move to so-called cleaner fuel. The temptation to switch land from food to fuel has been blamed for pushing up world food prices. Though the UN agency which assists small-scale farmers, IFAD, is cautious of such claims.
Most of the arguments are perhaps in the US, where a lot of corn goes into biofuel production. But when you look at it globally, it probably is not the cause of price hikes or food shortages. This year and last year, there have been severe climate impacts on crops. We're looking at the impact of climate change in our agricultural systems. So it is not just biofuel production.
There's still the key argument for Jatropha. It grows in marginal lands where little else does. Moses driving 300 kilometers inland from the Shimba Hills to Matito Ande, classified as marginal land like 2/3 of Kenya. So can biofuels help not just big companies, but small-scale farmers on marginal lands? Boniface Mwerki scrapes a living on a 5-acre farm so badly affected by drought, he rarely grows enough food for himself and his wife. They rely on food parcels for much of the year. What Boniface does grow, the biofuel Jatropha. And on his own farm, not some huge plantation. The drought-resistant crop first suggested to him by a private foundation. Small-scale farmer Moses helping his hard-pressed colleague out for the morning.
So does Jatropha benefit you more than growing the food crops?
Jatropha is 10 times more profitable than when I farm food. Because when the drought comes, we cannot rely on those food crops. Jatropha, therefore, provides an alternative income for me to buy food.
Moses hoes on thoughtfully. Small-scale farmer saved from hunger by biofuels. He wants to know more.
We're going to see those who introduced this Jatropha farming to the small-scale farmers here and why they believe that this is the way the farmers should go to be able to make ends meet.
The Jatropha project's run by the Vanilla Jatropha Foundation. The seeds are brought into town to be processed. They're grown by the 300 farmers the foundation's introduced to biofuels. Foundation Director Lorna Amwodo still with some work to do to convince Moses.
This is basically how the seed looks. We store it, we make sure that insects are kept away.
Lorna says the farmers are offered 20 shillings a kilo, about 20 US cents. Moses politely reserves judgment for now. Meantime, learning how easy it is to make Jatropha oil.
Open the valve.
Looks good, but Moses isn't convinced Boniface's success shows the whole project is working.
As we went out there to see Mr. Boniface, he's one of the model farmers. But the indicators of success of this project were quite absent. Yeah? And do you think this is the most viable project that you think can bring farmers out of poverty?
What has he produced out of that land? For 48 years, he's been living there. And in fact, this is the first time he's producing something out of that land.
Moses is about to learn something that could finally dent his skepticism. Biofuel farming has encouraged innovation in food farming.
There is a holistic angle to this magic crop. There is the environmental benefit, the ecological benefits. Apart from that, the improvement on soil, they might even actually end up in the end of all this magic benefiting from growing other crops because the soil rehabilitation, the moisture and things like that. Biofuels and the benefit for Africa is not exports. It is for local improvements and needs. That's the truth of the matter. It will never make a big industry for exports. It will never make a big industry, but it will improve the lives as they are.
I saw that it takes such a long time and such a big field to make meaningful production. And if that production is not very high, it means you're getting very little oil. And when I heard about the the price they offer, 20 shillings per kilo, oh dear, I was wonderstruck. I just don't know how farmers are going to make ends meet, if Lorna is able to give a meaningful producer price. Then I will join her to convince farmers, right? But if it's 20 shillings a kilo, I'm still not convinced.
Moses now uncertain what to advise other farmers, though not yet ready for biofuels himself.
Moses Shah would not plant jatropha as yet, because I am torn in between the stories that I've seen.
With Kenya only growing 12% of its own food, concerns about handing land over to biofuels are inevitable. But despite fears of so-called land grabbing, biofuels clearly present opportunities.
I believe that biofuels and bioenergy represent an opportunity for farmers to improve production, diversify their income. A lot of thought has to go into this. It's not a case of large plantation agriculture. Systems have to be employed that ensure that local farming expertise and local communities are thoroughly involved. The bioenergy is a natural asset of Africa, and it's very much for Africa to decide how they use that resource, and my heartfelt wish is that it's used sensibly, and if it is, it will be a rich resource for them in developing their agriculture and in reducing their energy costs and having clean, renewable energy.
Moses is back on his family farm on the Kenyan coast. He still has the same concern about biofuels as many farmers he represents. Biofuels may be the future, but this is a continent with a history of famine. So it's not surprising if this very influential farmer is for now putting food before fuel.
If you take away our land, where do we grow our food? How do we live off our land? If you have to beg food from other countries outside the continent, it means we cannot feed ourselves. Then what about that? The most important thing for us as small-scale farmers is food security. That's the most important thing.